My brother sent me to prison for the inheritance. After my release, I destroyed his empire. The beginning of the betrayal. If someone had asked me 10 years ago who I trusted the most in this world, I would have answered without thinking. My older brother, Daniel Carter. I never imagined that the same man I called my hero would one day steal 7 years of my life. People often say that strangers betray you. They're wrong. The deepest wounds are always inflicted by family. My name is Ethan Carter, and this is the story of how my own brother framed me for crimes I never committed, sent me to prison to steal our father's fortune, and how I returned to dismantle the empire he built on lies. But before I tell you about revenge, you need to understand how everything began. I was born into one of the wealthiest families in Massachusetts. My father, William Carter, wasn't born rich. He grew up in poverty, worked endless hours, and slowly transformed a small machine shop into Carter Industrial Holdings, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the country. By the time I was born, the company employed more than 20,000 people. Our family appeared perfect from the outside. A luxurious mansion, private schools, business magazines featuring my father's success, expensive vacations, charity galas. Everything looked flawless, but behind the polished smiles and family photographs, cracks had already begun to form. Daniel was 6 years older than me. As children, I admired him more than anyone. He taught me how to ride a bicycle. He protected me from bullies. Whenever I got scared during thunderstorms, he would sit beside my bed until I fell asleep. To me, he wasn't just my brother. He was my best friend. Everything changed after our mother died. Cancer took her in less than a year. I was only 12. Daniel was 18. Our father buried himself in work to escape the grief. Daniel buried himself in ambition. And I buried myself in memories. That was the moment our paths quietly separated. As the years passed, my father began preparing both of us for the family business. Every summer, instead of relaxing, we worked inside our factories. Not in executive offices. On the production floor. We wore helmets, steel-toe boots, safety glasses. We worked beside welders, mechanics, and assembly workers. Never ask an employee to do something you've never done yourself, my father always said. Daniel hated those summers. He believed the owner's son deserved respect automatically. I loved them. I enjoyed talking with employees, learning how every machine worked, listening to stories from workers who had spent decades building the company. Slowly, my father noticed the difference. Daniel focused on profits. I focused on people. At first, I didn't realize how much that difference mattered. Daniel did. When I graduated from Harvard Business School, my father invited me to lunch. It wasn't at an expensive restaurant. It was at the same little diner where he used to eat when he couldn't afford proper meals. He always said success should never erase your past. After we finished eating, he looked at me with unusual seriousness. Ethan. Yes. I've made mistakes as a father. I stayed silent. I gave both of you everything money could buy. He sighed. But maybe not enough of what truly mattered. What do you mean? He stared out the window. Daniel thinks leadership is about control. And you? I believe leadership is about responsibility. I didn't know why he was telling me this. Not yet. 6 months later, he announced a family meeting. Only 4 people were present. My father, Daniel, me, and our family attorney, Margaret Lewis. The atmosphere felt strangely heavy. Margaret placed several documents on the table. My father folded his hands. I've updated my will. Daniel smiled immediately. He had spent years assuming he would inherit everything. As the oldest son, he believed the company belonged to him. I've decided, my father continued, that Carter Industrial Holdings will remain equally owned by both of my sons. Daniel's smile weakened. But ownership alone isn't enough. He looked directly at me. Ethan will become Chief Executive Officer. The room fell completely silent. Daniel slowly turned toward me. For a moment, his face showed nothing. Then he smiled. A perfect smile. I'm happy for you, little brother. Anyone else would have believed him. I almost did. But for the first time in my life, his eyes frightened me. There was no happiness inside them, only disappointment, and something darker. Something I couldn't yet understand. Over the following weeks, Daniel changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. He stopped joining family dinners. He rarely answered my calls. At work, He became unusually polite. Too polite. Whenever I suggested improvements, he agreed immediately. Whenever our father praised me, Daniel applauded. It felt unnatural, almost rehearsed. One evening, I mentioned it to my father. "I think Daniel is upset." My father smiled sadly. "He'll accept it." "You really think so? He loves you." I wanted to believe that. I truly did. A month later, my father left for a 2-week business conference in Europe. It was the first time in years he had been away that long. Daniel was placed in charge of daily operations. I continued managing executive decisions from headquarters. Everything seemed normal. Until one Thursday morning, I arrived at my office just before 8. My assistant looked unusually nervous. "Mr. Carter, what happened? There are federal agents waiting inside." Before I could respond, 6 men in dark jackets walked toward me. "Mr. Ethan Carter?" "Yes. I'm Special Agent Robert Hayes." He displayed his badge. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest." I laughed nervously. There must be some mistake. I wish there were. He handed me several documents. Corporate fraud, money laundering, wire fraud, tax evasion, forgery, conspiracy. Each page carried my name. Each accusation felt impossible. "I've never done any of this." "You'll have the opportunity to explain." Employees gathered around us. Some whispered. Others stared in complete disbelief. News crews appeared outside the building within minutes. Someone had clearly informed the media before the arrest. That wasn't normal. Someone wanted the entire country to watch me fall. As the agents escorted me toward the elevator, I saw Daniel rushing through the lobby. "Ethan!" He looked horrified. "What happened?" "They're saying I committed fraud." "That's impossible." He grabbed my shoulder. "I'll hire the best lawyers. I promise." His performance was flawless. Even the agents seemed convinced he was a worried brother. As they led me outside, camera flashes exploded from every direction. Reporters shouted questions. "Did you steal company funds? How much money did you hide overseas? Were you planning to flee the country?" I couldn't answer. I barely understood what was happening. As the prison transport vehicle pulled away, I looked back through the window. Daniel was standing on the courthouse steps, watching me leave. For just a second, his worried expression disappeared. A faint smile crossed his face. Then it was gone. So quickly that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. That single smile became the image I replayed every night for the next 7 years. Because in that moment, I finally realized something. My arrest wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't bad luck. It was the first move in a game my brother had been planning for years. And I had walked straight into his trap. 7 years in hell. The first night in federal prison felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The steel door slammed shut behind me with a deafening clang. That sound echoed through the narrow cell, and in that instant, I realized something terrifying. No amount of money, no powerful last name, no expensive lawyer could open that door. I sat on the cold metal bed and stared at the concrete wall. Only 24 hours earlier, I had been sitting in the executive office of a billion-dollar corporation. Now I was prisoner number 48173. My tailored suits had been replaced by a faded gray prison uniform. My expensive watch was gone. My phone was gone. My freedom was gone. And somewhere outside those walls, my brother was living the life he had stolen from me. The trial lasted only 3 weeks. The prosecution presented thousands of financial documents, wire transfers, offshore accounts, forged contracts, emails that appeared to come from my computer. Every piece of evidence pointed directly at me. My lawyers argued that I had been framed, but without proof, it sounded like a desperate excuse. The final blow came when Daniel took the witness stand. I couldn't believe my eyes. He looked devastated. He even cried. "I never wanted to believe my brother was capable of this," he told the jury, his voice trembling. "But no one is above the law." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the jury that he was lying, that he was the one behind everything. But I had no evidence, only my word against his. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced me to 7 years in federal prison. As the bailiff placed handcuffs on my wrists, I looked at Daniel one last time. He lowered his head, pretending he couldn't bear to look at me. But just before I was led away, our eyes met. There it was again. That tiny smile. The smile of a man who had just won everything. Prison wasn't like the movies. It was worse. Far worse. There were no dramatic fights every day. No constant violence. Instead, there was something much crueler. Routine. Every morning at 5 o'clock, the lights came on. Every meal tasted the same. Every hallway looked identical. Every day blended into the next until time itself lost meaning. The hardest part wasn't the food, or the cold, or even the loneliness. It was being forgotten. The media moved on. The company moved on. The world moved on. I no longer existed. For 6 months, I received only one visitor. My father. He looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen him. His shoulders were slumped. His hair had turned almost completely white. "I'm sorry," he whispered through the glass. "You have nothing to apologize for. I failed to protect you. You still believe I'm innocent?" He looked offended. "Ethan, you're my son. I know your heart." Tears filled my eyes. He was the only person left who believed me. "I'll find the truth," he promised. "I don't care how long it takes." I smiled for the first time in months. "I know you will." As the guard announced that visiting hours were over, my father pressed his hand against the glass. I placed mine against it. Neither of us knew. It would be the last time we would ever see each other. About a year into my sentence, I met the man who changed my life. His name was Victor Hayes. He was in his late 60s, calm, intelligent, and strangely respected by everyone. He had once been one of the country's best forensic accountants before being convicted for insider trading. One afternoon, he noticed me reading a thick book on corporate finance. "You don't belong here," he said. I looked up. "What makes you think that?" The guilty usually spend their time blaming everyone else. "You spend yours learning." That conversation lasted 4 hours. It became the first of hundreds. Victor taught me how financial crimes were hidden, how shell companies worked, how money disappeared across borders, how corporations buried evidence beneath thousands of legal transactions. He often said something I never forgot. "Numbers never lie, Ethan. People do." A few months later, another inmate joined our work detail. Marcus Reed. Before prison, he had worked in cybersecurity for one of the largest technology firms in America. His crime, hacking multinational corporations. He wasn't proud of it. He simply admitted he'd been young and arrogant. Marcus introduced me to the digital world hidden beneath modern business. Encrypted communications, server backups, deleted databases, digital footprints. He smiled one evening and said, "People think deleting a file makes it disappear. It doesn't. It only becomes harder to find." That sentence stayed with me. If Daniel had framed me digitally, then somewhere, evidence still existed. The third mentor entered my life during my 4th year. Former FBI investigator Samuel Brooks, forced into retirement after exposing corruption inside his own department. He had later been framed himself. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Samuel taught me something far more valuable than investigation. He taught me patience. "If you're chasing revenge," he said, "you're already losing. I want justice. So does every angry man. What's the difference?" He leaned back in his chair. "Revenge attacks people. Justice attacks the truth." That conversation changed everything. Until then, I wanted Daniel to suffer. After that, I wanted the truth to destroy him. There was a difference. A very important difference. 3 years into my sentence, I received devastating news. The prison guard quietly approached my table during lunch. "Carter, you've got legal mail." I opened the envelope immediately. It wasn't from my lawyer. It was from Margaret Lewis, our family attorney. My hands began to shake as I read the first sentence. "Your father passed away peacefully last night." Everything around me disappeared. The cafeteria, the noise, the people. I couldn't hear anything anymore. Only silence. My father had died believing his youngest son was sitting inside a prison cell. I wasn't allowed to attend the funeral. I wasn't allowed to say goodbye. I wasn't even allowed to stand beside his grave. That night, for the first time since entering prison, I cried, not because I had lost my freedom, but because I had lost the only man who never stopped believing in me. A week later, another letter arrived. Inside was a handwritten note. It was from my father. Margaret explained that he had written it months before his death and instructed her to give it to me if he didn't live long enough to clear my name. The letter read, "My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, then I failed. I'm sorry. I search for the truth every single day. Someone very powerful covered their tracks. But I know you. I know the son I raised. An innocent man can lose his freedom, but he must never lose his character. Don't let hatred become your prison after these walls disappear. When the truth finally comes, let justice speak louder than revenge. I'm proud of you. I always will be. Love. Dad." I read those words at least 100 times. Then I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my Bible. From that day forward, I stopped counting the years until my release. Instead, I started preparing for the day I would walk out of prison. Not as a broken man, but as a man with a purpose. I would uncover every lie, every forged document, every hidden account, every person my brother had paid to destroy my life. And when the time came, I wouldn't destroy Daniel with anger. I would destroy him with the truth. The man who returned. The morning of my release didn't feel the way I had imagined for 7 long years. There were no reporters waiting outside, no family members, no old friends, no celebration. Just a correctional officer who handed me a small paper bag containing the few belongings I had when I was arrested. My old wallet, a faded photograph of my parents and Daniel, a broken wristwatch that no longer worked, and my father's handwritten letter. "Good luck, Carter," the officer said as the prison gates opened. I nodded without saying a word. For a moment, I simply stood there, staring at the road ahead. 7 years, 7 birthdays, 7 Christmases, 7 years of my life had vanished forever. No one could ever give them back. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "This time, I choose patience." Then I started walking. Margaret Lewis was waiting in the parking lot. She looked older, but her sharp blue eyes hadn't changed. As soon as she saw me, she wrapped me in a hug. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." "So am I." She stepped back and handed me a folder. "Your father left this for you." Inside were property deeds, investment statements, and a sealed envelope. "What's this?" He never stopped preparing for the day you'd come home. I opened the envelope carefully. It contained a cashier's check for $4.8 million. I looked at Margaret in disbelief. I thought Daniel inherited everything. He inherited the company. Margaret smiled faintly. "Your father quietly built a private investment portfolio years before his death. No one knew about it. Not even Daniel." I felt my throat tighten. My father planned for this. He hoped you'd never need it. For the next few months, I disappeared. No interviews. No lawsuits. No press conferences. The world believed Ethan Carter had quietly accepted his fate. That illusion worked in my favor. I rented a small apartment in Chicago under my own name, but I lived like a ghost. Every morning began the same way. Coffee, exercise, reading, research, planning. I studied everything Daniel had done during the past 7 years. Every acquisition, every business deal, every board appointment, every lawsuit. The more I learned, the more obvious the truth became. Daniel hadn't just inherited Carter Industrial Holdings. He had transformed it into something my father would have despised. Factories were closing. Thousands of loyal employees had been laid off. Safety regulations had been ignored. Small family-owned businesses had been forced into bankruptcy after refusing to sell to him. Profits had doubled. So had the number of enemies he'd made. Power had changed him. Or perhaps it had simply revealed who he had always been. One evening, Margaret called me. "There's someone you need to meet." The next afternoon, she introduced me to a retired investigative journalist named Oliver Grant. For more than 30 years, Oliver had exposed political corruption, corporate fraud, and organized crime. He had won awards for stories that powerful people desperately wanted buried. "I've been investigating your brother," Oliver said calmly. I frowned. "Why?" "Because too many honest people have disappeared after crossing him." He slid a thick file across the table. Inside were photographs, financial records, witness statements, copies of confidential emails. "This isn't enough to convict him," Oliver admitted. "But it's enough to start asking dangerous questions." I looked at him carefully. "Why help me?" He smiled. "Because your father once saved my newspaper from bankruptcy. He asked for nothing in return. I don't forget debts." Over the next year, Oliver and I became partners. Not in revenge. In truth. We traveled across the country meeting former executives who had suddenly resigned, factory managers who had been forced into silence, whistleblowers who had accepted settlements in exchange for secrecy. One by one, they began talking. Not because of me, because Daniel had betrayed them too. Everyone carried a different piece of the puzzle. Together, those pieces formed a terrifying picture. Bribery, corporate espionage, environmental violations, illegal lobbying, fraud, witness intimidation. Daniel hadn't simply framed me. He had built an empire fueled by corruption. One evening, while reviewing old financial records, Marcus Reed, the cybersecurity expert I'd met in prison, called me. He had been released 6 months before I was. I found something. What is it? Remember those emails they used against you? Of course. They weren't sent from your computer. My heart nearly stopped. What? They were routed through a clone server. Someone duplicated your company's internal network. I stared at the wall in silence. Can you prove it? There was a pause. I can. But whoever did this had serious resources. I smiled for the first time that week. So did my brother. 3 months later, Marcus arrived in Chicago carrying 2 encrypted hard drives. For the next several days, we worked almost without sleeping. By comparing archived server logs with recovered backup files, Marcus uncovered something astonishing. Every forged email used during my trial had been created from the same hidden administrator account. That account had only been accessed 3 times. Each login originated from one location, the executive office, occupied by Daniel Carter. For 7 years, everyone believed the evidence against me was undeniable. Now, the evidence itself had become the crime. We're not ready, Oliver warned. What do you mean? If we expose this today, Daniel's lawyers will bury it before prosecutors even read it. So what do we do? Oliver leaned back. We build a case so strong that no judge can ignore it. He was right. This wasn't about proving my innocence anymore. That battle had already been won. This was about exposing an entire criminal network, and that required patience. With my father's investment money, I founded a private investment firm called Northbridge Capital. Officially, we invested in struggling manufacturing companies. Unofficially, we rescued businesses Daniel had tried to destroy. Within 3 years, Northbridge Capital had become one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the Midwest. People praised our ethics. Employees trusted us. Investors respected us. For the first time since prison, I wasn't surviving. I was building. Ironically, everything my father had wanted for Carter Industrial Holdings. I was creating somewhere else. Success brought something unexpected. Attention. Business magazines started writing about the mysterious founder of Northbridge Capital. Television interviews were requested. Industry conferences invited me to speak. I declined every invitation. The less Daniel knew about me, the better. But secrets don't last forever. One afternoon, Margaret walked into my office holding a newspaper. Without saying a word, she placed it on my desk. The headline read, Carter Industrial Holdings announces hostile takeover of Northbridge Capital. I looked up slowly. Margaret sighed. He finally noticed you. I smiled. No. He finally walked into my trap. 4 years, Daniel believed he was hunting competitors. He had no idea. The competitor he had chosen to attack was the brother he thought he had destroyed. And this time, I wasn't the prey. I was the one setting the rules. The war between brothers. The morning after Daniel announced his hostile takeover of Northbridge Capital, every major business newspaper carried the same headline. Daniel Carter declares war on Northbridge Capital. Financial analysts predicted our company wouldn't survive. Television experts laughed at us. Northbridge is too small. They don't have the resources. They'll be forced to sell within weeks. I watched every interview without saying a word. People thought this was a battle between 2 corporations. They had no idea it was a battle between 2 brothers. One fighting for power, the other fighting for the truth. Daniel's first move came faster than expected. Within 48 hours, 3 of our biggest suppliers suddenly canceled their contracts. No explanation. No warning. Just short emails claiming they had chosen another business direction. Marcus looked at me across the conference table. He bought them. I know. Should we sue? I shook my head. No. Why not? Because that's exactly what he wants. Daniel wanted us distracted. He wanted us spending money on legal battles instead of building our business. I refused to play his game. Instead, we found smaller manufacturers that had been pushed out of the market by Carter Industrial Holdings. Many of them had been family businesses for generations. Daniel had nearly destroyed them. We gave them a second chance. Within 2 months, our supply chain was stronger than before. Sometimes your greatest weakness becomes your greatest strength. Daniel wasn't finished. A week later, anonymous articles began appearing online. They claimed Northbridge Capital was hiding financial problems, that our investors were pulling out, that we were close to bankruptcy. The stories spread across social media like wildfire. Our phones didn't stop ringing. Investors demanded answers. Employees became nervous. Margaret entered my office holding several printed articles. They're fake. I know. But they're hurting us. I smiled. They're hurting him more. She looked confused. How? Because lies leave fingerprints. Marcus had already traced the fake news campaign to a public relations firm in New York. The same firm Daniel secretly paid millions of dollars every year. We documented everything. Every payment. Every email. Every fake article. We didn't respond publicly. We simply added more evidence to our growing file. Months passed. The business war became more aggressive. Daniel bribed distributors to stop working with us. He pressured banks to reject our loan applications. He even convinced several politicians to investigate our company for imaginary violations. Every obstacle cost us money. Every attack slowed our growth. But none of them stopped us. In fact, they revealed something important. Daniel wasn't trying to make money anymore. He was trying to destroy me. That meant he was scared, and frightened people make mistakes. One evening, Oliver Grant rushed into my office carrying a laptop. I think we've got him. What happened? A whistleblower. He opened a folder filled with scanned documents. A senior executive from Carter Industrial Holdings had secretly contacted him. The executive had spent 15 years working directly under Daniel. 4 years, he had remained silent. Now he wanted immunity. He says Daniel keeps a private server. Marcus immediately looked interested. A private server? Oliver nodded. Completely separate from the company's official network. What does he store on it? No one knows. But according to the whistleblower, it contains records Daniel never wanted anyone to see. My heartbeat quickened. If that server existed, it could prove everything. Finding it wouldn't be easy. The server was hidden inside Carter Industrial Holdings headquarters in Boston, protected by biometric security, encrypted firewalls, and 24-hour surveillance. Breaking into the building wasn't an option. Neither was hacking it remotely. Marcus studied the blueprints for nearly a week. Finally, he looked up. We don't have to break in. What do you mean? We make Daniel bring the server to us. I frowned. How? Marcus smiled. We become too important to ignore. Over the next 6 months, Northbridge Capital expanded aggressively. We acquired 3 struggling manufacturing companies, opened offices in Dallas, Denver, and Atlanta, signed contracts with several Fortune 500 corporations. Within a year, Northbridge had become one of the fastest-growing investment firms in America. Business magazines called us the future of ethical manufacturing. Investors poured billions into our projects. For the first time, Daniel faced a competitor he couldn't crush. Every victory we achieved became another insult to his ego. Exactly as we planned. Then, one Friday afternoon, something unexpected happened. Margaret walked into my office looking unusually serious. You have a visitor. I don't have any meetings. I know. You'll want to see this one. A man in his early 50s entered the room. His expensive suit couldn't hide the fear on his face. My name is Richard Evans. I've been Daniel Carter's chief financial officer for 11 years. I remained silent. He placed a flash drive on my desk. I'm done protecting him. Why now? Richard took a deep breath. Because last week, he asked me to destroy evidence. What kind of evidence? The evidence proving you were framed. The room became completely silent. Marcus slowly picked up the flash drive. If this is real, Richard interrupted. It is. I made copies before he ordered everything deleted. I stared at him. Why risk your life? His eyes filled with regret. Because I testified against you. My chest tightened. You were one of the witnesses at my trial. He nodded. I lied. I knew the evidence had been fabricated. I was too afraid to tell the truth. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, I asked, "Can you prove it?" He looked directly into my eyes. "I can prove everything." That night, Marcus spent hours examining the files. Just after midnight, he stood up. His face had turned pale. "Ethan!" "What?" "You need to see this." On the screen was a video recording from Daniel's private office. The timestamp was dated 3 weeks before my arrest. Daniel was speaking with Richard. His words froze my blood. "Once Ethan goes to prison, the company belongs to me. Make sure every document points to him." Richard's voice could be heard asking, "And if your father finds out?" Daniel laughed. "He won't. By the time anyone discovers the truth, it'll be too late." I couldn't breathe. For 7 years, I had waited for proof. Now it was playing on my computer screen. Daniel hadn't simply betrayed me. He had planned every detail, every forged signature, every fake bank transfer, every lie told in court, everything. Marcus slowly closed the laptop. "It's over." I looked at him. "No, it's just beginning." Because now, we didn't just have suspicions. We had a confession, and for the first time since my arrest, I knew exactly how my brother's empire would fall. The empire falls. For 7 years, Daniel Carter had lived like a king. Every business magazine called him a visionary. Politicians shook his hand. Television hosts praised his leadership. Investors trusted him with billions of dollars. To the world, he was the man who had saved Carter Industrial Holdings after his younger brother's criminal betrayal. Only I knew the truth. He hadn't saved the company. He had stolen it. And now, the bill for his lies was finally coming due. 3 days after Daniel announced his hostile takeover of Northbridge Capital, my executive team gathered in our Chicago headquarters. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone expected me to fight the takeover through the courts. Instead, I smiled. "Our response," I said, "is simple. We accept." The room fell silent. My chief financial officer looked confused. "Accept? They're trying to buy us." "I know. Then why would we agree?" "Because Daniel thinks he's buying a company." I looked around the table. In reality, he's buying the evidence that will destroy him. No one spoke. Only Margaret understood. She smiled quietly. The trap was almost ready. 4 months. Daniel's legal team conducted what they believed was a routine due diligence investigation. They reviewed our books, our contracts, our employees, our assets. Everything appeared flawless. Because it was. Northbridge Capital was a legitimate company, but hidden deep within our encrypted internal archive was something they would eventually discover. A digital data room, only accessible after the acquisition agreement was signed. Daniel believed it contained valuable market research. Instead, it contained 7 years of carefully documented evidence. Every illegal payment, every shell company, every forged invoice, every witness statement, every recovered email proving he had framed me, every backup Marcus had recovered. Everything. The acquisition closed on a Monday morning. Daniel celebrated publicly. Business channels praised him for eliminating his fastest-growing competitor. "Our future has never looked brighter," he told reporters. I watched the interview from my office. Then I turned to Marcus. "Send it." He nodded. With a single click, the encrypted archive automatically copied itself to 4 different destinations. The U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Internal Revenue Service. There was no turning back. 2 days later, everything changed. At 8:17 a.m., federal agents entered Carter Industrial Holdings headquarters in Boston. Employees watched in disbelief as investigators sealed executive offices. Computers were confiscated. Servers were disconnected. Boxes of financial records were carried into waiting trucks. Television helicopters circled overhead. Every major news network interrupted regular programming. Breaking news. Federal investigation targets Carter Industrial Holdings. I sat quietly in my office, watching history unfold. Not with satisfaction, with relief, because the truth was finally free. Daniel called me less than an hour later. It was the first time we had spoken in nearly 10 years. I answered, "Ethan." His voice was shaking. "What did you do?" "I told the truth. You set me up." I almost laughed. "You should recognize the feeling." Silence. Then anger exploded through the phone. You think you've won? No. I think justice has finally started. He slammed the phone down. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Marcus's digital evidence was impossible to ignore. Every forged email used during my trial had been traced back to Daniel's executive account. Financial analysts uncovered more than 200 fraudulent transactions. Federal prosecutors froze dozens of offshore accounts. Executives who had once protected Daniel suddenly began cooperating. One after another, they accepted plea deals. Loyalty disappears quickly when prison becomes a possibility. Within 3 weeks, the case against Daniel had become overwhelming. The annual shareholders meeting was scheduled despite the chaos. It was supposed to reassure investors. Instead, it became the day Carter Industrial Holdings collapsed. The auditorium was packed. Shareholders, journalists, employees, government investigators, board members, everyone wanted answers. Daniel walked onto the stage looking exhausted. His expensive suit couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. He approached the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, before he could continue, the doors at the back of the auditorium opened. FBI agents entered. Behind them came SEC investigators, then federal prosecutors. The room fell completely silent. One agent approached the stage. Daniel Carter? Yes! You're under arrest for conspiracy, securities fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and the fabrication of evidence used in a federal criminal prosecution. Gasps echoed throughout the auditorium. Television cameras captured every second. Daniel looked around desperately. His board members avoided eye contact. His attorneys remained frozen. The empire he had spent 7 years protecting collapsed in less than 60 seconds. As agents escorted him away, Daniel suddenly stopped. He turned around. Our eyes met across the room. For a brief moment, everything else disappeared. No cameras, no reporters, no investors, just two brothers. He stared at me with disbelief. You planned this? I nodded slowly. No. I prepared for it. There was a difference. He had acted out of greed. I had acted with patience. That evening, every television channel in America carried the same story. The man once convicted of corporate fraud has officially been declared the victim of one of the largest corporate conspiracies in modern American history. Legal experts called it unprecedented. Financial analysts predicted Carter Industrial Holdings might never recover. Former employees finally spoke publicly. Whistleblowers came forward. Victims filed lawsuits worth billions of dollars. Daniel's empire wasn't simply falling. It was being buried beneath the weight of its own lies. Late that night, I drove alone to my father's grave. The cemetery was quiet. Rain fell gently across the stone. I placed my hand on the cold marble. They know the truth now. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I smiled. I wish you were here to see it. The wind moved softly through the trees. For the first time in nearly a decade, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Peace. But the story wasn't over yet. Daniel still had one final move to make. And our last conversation would change both of our lives forever. The final conversation. People often believe revenge ends the moment your enemy falls. They're wrong. Watching Daniel lose everything didn't erase the 7 years I had spent behind bars. It didn't bring my father back. It didn't return the birthdays, holidays, and memories that had been stolen from me. Justice had won, but healing would take much longer. 6 months passed after Daniel's arrest. The federal investigation became one of the largest corporate fraud cases in American history. More than 30 executives pleaded guilty. Several politicians resigned after accepting illegal payments from Carter Industrial Holdings. The company's stock, once worth over $200 a share, had collapsed to less than 12. Thousands of shareholders lost fortunes. Hundreds of lawsuits were filed. Every newspaper in the country carried the same headline. The Carter Empire has fallen. I was offered dozens of television interviews, book deals, documentaries. Even Hollywood producers wanted to buy the rights to my story. I refused them all. 4 years, my life had been treated like entertainment by the media. I had no intention of letting them profit from my pain. One rainy afternoon, Margaret entered my office carrying a sealed envelope. It came from Daniel's attorney. I looked at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten note. Ethan, I know I don't deserve your time. I know you'll probably burn this letter. But before I'm sentenced, I need to see you. Just once. Daniel. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. Margaret watched me carefully. You don't have to go. I know. So will you? I stared out the window. For years, I had imagined this moment. The chance to face the man who had destroyed my life. Surprisingly, I wasn't angry anymore. I'll go. The federal detention center was quieter than I remembered. Walking through those gray hallways brought back memories I had tried to bury. The smell. The sound of heavy doors locking behind me. The echo of footsteps. It all felt painfully familiar. A guard escorted me into a small visitation room. Daniel was already sitting there. For a moment, I barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone. His hair had turned gray. His face looked thinner. Older. Defeated. He stood as I entered. Thank you for coming. I sat down across from him. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. You look happy. I found peace. He nodded slowly. I don't remember what that feels like. Daniel looked down at his hands. I've replayed everything 1,000 times. So have I. I kept asking myself when I became the person sitting in this room. I didn't answer. He continued. It wasn't about money. It wasn't. I shook my head. You framed me. You buried me alive. You stole Dad's company. If it wasn't about money, then what was it? Daniel closed his eyes. It started when we were kids. I frowned. What do you mean? You don't remember, do you? Remember what? Dad. When I was 12, Daniel said quietly, Dad took me to the factory. He introduced me to one of the employees. The man asked him, Is this the boy who will run the company one day? I nodded. I remember stories like that. Daniel gave a bitter smile. Dad laughed. And he said, Maybe, but leadership has to be earned. Daniel looked up at me. I spent the next 20 years trying to earn those words. His voice cracked. But every time Dad looked at you, I saw pride. Every time he looked at me, I saw disappointment. You were wrong, I said softly. I know that now. But jealousy doesn't listen to reason. Tears filled Daniel's eyes. The night before your arrest, I almost stopped everything. My heart skipped. What? I had the evidence in my office. I could have destroyed it. I could have confessed. So why didn't you? He stared at the table. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? That Dad would choose you forever. I let out a slow breath. Dad didn't choose me. He chose the future of the company. There is a difference. Daniel smiled sadly. I understand that now. Unfortunately, it took losing everything. The room fell silent again. Finally, Daniel reached into his pocket. The guard immediately stepped forward. It's okay, Daniel said. He removed a folded photograph. It was old. Faded. The edges were worn. It showed two young boys standing beside their father in front of the first Carter factory. Daniel was 14. I was 8. Both of us were smiling. He slid the photograph across the table. I kept this all these years. I stared at it. I almost threw it away after your arrest. But I couldn't. For the first time since entering the room, I saw my brother again. Not the billionaire. Not the criminal. Just a frightened boy who had spent his entire life believing he wasn't enough. I'm sorry, Ethan. The words came out almost as a whisper. I know they can't fix anything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I needed you to hear them. I looked at him for a long time. Then I picked up the photograph. I forgave you a long time ago. His eyes widened. You did. I forgave you. Because carrying hatred was another prison. He lowered his head and began to cry. But forgiveness, I continued, doesn't erase consequences. He nodded. I know. I'll spend the rest of my life paying for what I did. Neither of us spoke again. When the guard announced the visit was over, Daniel stood. So this is goodbye. Yes. I'm proud of the man you became. I smiled sadly. I became him because I had no other choice. For a second, it looked like he wanted to hug me. Instead, he simply nodded. Then he walked away. I never saw my brother again. A year later, Daniel was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison. He accepted full responsibility. He never appealed. He never blamed anyone else. As part of his plea agreement, he testified against every executive who had helped frame me. Many of them were convicted. Some received lengthy prison sentences. Others lost everything they had built. The truth had finally reached every corner of the conspiracy. After the trials ended, the court officially returned control of Carter Industrial Holdings to a court-appointed board. Many people expected me to reclaim the company. I refused. Instead, I created the William Carter Foundation, using most of my personal wealth to support vocational schools, engineering scholarships, and small manufacturing businesses across America. My father had spent his life creating opportunities for others. I wanted his legacy to continue. Northbridge Capital continued to grow, but we never forgot the lessons that had built it. Every new employee learned the same principle my father had taught me years ago. Leadership isn't measured by how many people work for you. It's measured by how many people succeed because of you. Those words became the heart of our company. Every year on my father's birthday, I visit the old factory where everything began. Most of the original buildings are gone now. Only the small brick workshop remains. I stand there for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of machines and workers. It reminds me why my father built the company in the first place. Not for wealth, not for power, but to create honest work for honest people. Sometimes visitors recognize me from old newspaper articles. They often ask the same question. Was revenge worth it? I always give them the same answer. It wasn't revenge. It was the truth. Revenge destroys people. The truth destroys lies. And lies, no matter how carefully they're built, never survive forever. The end.